The 1960s has always fascinated me for several reasons, particularly because of the enormous social and cultural changes that took place in the United States during that time. Few areas reflected those changes more clearly than fashion. When the decade began, many women were still dressing in styles that looked very much like the late 1950s. Full skirts, fitted waist, gloves, and ladylike accessories were still common sights, but those familiar fashions wouldn't remain dominant for long. Over the course of the decade, women's fashion underwent a remarkable transformation. By 1969, the clothing, hairstyles, and overall look of the average woman were dramatically different from what they had been in 1960. In many ways, the story of 1960s fashion is the story of a society in transition. The 1960s was a decade of change, and fashion was no exception. It began with the last whispers of 1950s elegance and ended with youth-driven rebellion in full color. In this video, we'll explore how women's fashion transformed across the decade. From the structured, ladylike silhouettes of the early 1960s to the cleaner, more youthful mod styles of the mid-decade, and finally into the freer, more expressive looks of the late 1960s. To begin, in 1960, women's fashion as seen in major department store catalogs like Sears, JCPenney, Montgomery Ward, and Spiegel still strongly reflected the elegance of the late 1950s. The silhouette remained defined and feminine, built around a cinched waist, structured bodices, and full skirts that often held their shape with petticoats or crinolines. Circle skirts were still widely featured, especially in youthful and casual styles, alongside more tailored designs that emphasized polish and structure. Even as the decade opened, fashion had not yet broken away from the previous era. It was still very much rooted in that refined, post-war ideal of femininity. Dresses defined most wardrobes. Sheath dresses offered a slim, straight silhouette. Shirt-waist dresses with button-front details and belted waist gave a more practical, everyday structure. Cocktail dresses and tea-length dresses appeared for dressier occasions, often in wool blends, silk, or structured cottons that maintained shape and form. Even traditional tailoring details carried over. Peplums, so common in the late 1940s and 50s, still appeared in suits and dresses, adding subtle shaping at the waist and hips while maintaining a polished look. Across most garments, the emphasis remained on structure and modesty. Slips were still commonly worn under dresses to maintain smooth lines, and stockings with garter belts were standard. Pantyhose existed but had not yet fully replaced traditional hosiery in everyday wear. Skirts followed the same refined direction. A-line skirts were emerging as a slightly newer alternative to fuller skirts, offering a cleaner, more modern silhouette. Pencil skirts remained a staple for business and dressier wear, while pleated skirts and occasional circle skirts continued the 1950s influence. Hemlines generally stayed at or just below the knee, maintaining a consistent sense of modesty and polish. While dresses and skirts dominated, women's pants were beginning to appear more in casual settings. Capri pants and cigarette pants were especially popular, designed with a slim, tapered fit that felt modern but still controlled. However, pants were still largely considered informal. They were worn for leisure, errands, or at-home wear, not for school or formal occasions. In fact, dress codes were still very strict in many places. Girls were generally expected to wear dresses or skirts, even in school settings, with pants reserved for after-hours wear. This is where the collegiate or preppy look becomes especially important. Heavily influenced by Ivy League style, it was one of the defining youth aesthetics of the early 1960s. Plaid skirts, often pleated, were paired with blazers, cardigan sets, and neatly tucked blouses. Sweater sets were incredibly common, often in soft, coordinated tones. But as the decade progresses into the mid-1960s, fashion begins to noticeably shift. While the polished elegance of the early 1960s remains very much in style, straighter silhouettes, simpler lines, and more youthful designs begin to appear. Shift dresses, A-line styles, geometric influences, and coordinated separates become increasingly popular, giving women more choices than ever before. One style that had all but disappeared by this time was the full circle skirt worn over layers of petticoats. So beloved just a few years earlier, that voluminous 1950s-inspired silhouette had quickly fallen out of fashion, giving way to slimmer, lighter, and more modern designs. The influence of First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy could still be seen throughout the mid-1960s. Elegant sheath dresses, tailored shirt-waist dresses, collarless box jackets, and coordinated suits remained wardrobe staples for many women, often accessorized with white gloves, pearls, and the iconic pillbox hat. At the same time, newer fashions introduced looser silhouettes alongside these classic tailored styles rather than replacing them altogether. Hemlines also continued to rise during this period, although most dresses in department store catalogs remained around the knee or only slightly above it. While the miniskirt was beginning to attract attention, particularly among younger women, it had not yet become the dominant everyday look seen later in the decade. Color and pattern became more graphic and bold. Soft pastels were joined by vivid colors, black and white contrast, stripes, checks, and geometric prints influenced by modern art and contemporary design. Clothing became visually striking while maintaining clean, uncluttered lines. New staples also emerged in everyday wear. Capri pants, slim cigarette trousers, culottes, and wrap skirts became increasingly popular casual alternatives to dresses, while sleeveless shifts, simple knit dresses, and coordinated separates reflected the growing demand for practical, versatile clothing. Much of this evolution was influenced by London's vibrant youth fashion scene. Designers such as Quant helped popularize shorter hemlines, lower waistlines, bold collars, neckties, and youthful silhouettes that gradually filtered into mainstream American fashion through department stores like Sears and JCPenney. Overall, mid-1960s fashion was less a complete break from the past than a period of transition. Traditional tailored styles remained fashionable, even as newer, more youthful influences broadened women's choices and paved the way for the more experimental fashions of the late 1960s. By the late 1960s, fashion had become more diverse than at any other point in the decade. While many of the youthful mod influences remained, styles became increasingly relaxed and individualistic as women embraced a wider variety of looks. Hemlines remained short, but silhouettes loosened even further. A-line dresses, shift dresses, babydoll styles, jumpers, and simple knit dresses continued to dominate department store catalogs, while coordinated separates allowed women to mix and match skirts, sweaters, blouses, and jackets with greater freedom. Pants also became much more common for everyday wear. Slim leg slacks and tailored wide leg trousers appeared frequently in catalogs, reflecting the growing acceptance of women wearing pants outside the home. Although bell bottoms had emerged by the late 1960s as part of the youth movement, they appear only occasionally in major department store catalogs like Sears and JCPenney. Many fashion-conscious young people even made their own by adding fabric inserts to existing pants to create the flared look. From what I've seen in these catalogs, however, bell bottoms wouldn't become truly mainstream until the 1970s, when flared styles appeared much more frequently. Late 60s fashion also embraced global influences. Ethnic-inspired looks became increasingly popular, including Nehru jackets, embroidered tunics, peasant blouses, and garments inspired by Indian, Eastern European, and Middle Eastern textiles and embroidery. These styles reflected the decade's growing fascination with world cultures and handcrafted clothing. Color also became much bolder. Bright oranges, avocado greens, mustard yellows, hot pinks, vivid blues, and bold floral prints appeared alongside large plaids, checks, and graphic patterns. Textiles such as corduroy, velvet, and double knits became increasingly popular, giving clothing a softer, more casual feel. Despite these changing styles, one thing remained much the same. Most women and girls still considered slips an essential part of getting dressed. As hemlines rose, slips became shorter as well, with manufacturers offering versions designed specifically for the new above-the-knee fashions. By the end of the decade, women had more choices than ever before. A woman could still dress in a classic tailored suit, wear a youthful A-line mini dress, choose coordinated sportswear, or embrace one of the newer bohemian-inspired looks. It was this diversity of styles that made the late 1960s one of the most exciting and influential periods in fashion history. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I actually saved something special for the end. I'd love to show you a few garments I made for my daughter when she was younger, using authentic vintage sewing patterns from the 1960s. First up is vintage Butterick sewing pattern 2553. Butterick didn't date most of their sewing patterns back then, so there's no copyright date printed on the envelope. However, I know for certain this is an early 1960s style. It features a full skirt, a large contrasting yoke, and a classic silhouette that has all the hallmarks of children's fashion from this period. It's youthful, sweet, and still quite traditional compared to what would come later in the decade, as you are about to see. I used Vintage Simplicity sewing pattern 7228 to make this dress. It's dated 1967. Of course, in its original form, this dress was too short for my daughter, so I lengthened it a bit, but otherwise I stayed true to the original pattern. The dress has a loose A-line silhouette. The prominent round yoke frames the neck, and piping serves as the primary design accent, emphasizing the clean lines and graceful curves of the design. Combined with the paisley print, these details reflect the playful yet sophisticated style of the late 1960s. This next dress was made from Vintage Simplicity sewing pattern 7668, copyrighted in 1968. While I stayed true to the original design, I made a few changes of my own. I lined the dress, omitted the shoulder bows, and added rickrack near the hem, and lengthened the skirt a bit for modesty. Even with those changes, it remains a wonderful example of late 1960s children's fashion. Like many other children's dresses of the late 1960s, it features a simple A-line shipped silhouette with no defined waistline. Gone are the full skirts and fitted bodices that were so common at the beginning of the decade. Instead, the emphasis is on clean lines, easy movement, and bold color. The oversized paisley print and bright pinks, oranges, and greens are quintessential late 1960s, reflecting the playful, youthful spirit of the era. And last but not least is this cute baby doll dress made from late 1960s McCall sewing pattern 9384. I made the shorter version. It features an empire waist, puff sleeves, and a self-fabric ruffle cut on the bias. I used gingham to make this dress, and because the matching ruffle is cut on the bias, it twists the gingham grid into a super cute diamond pattern. It adds the perfect touch of contrast and visual interest against the rest of the dress. And there you have it, a deep dive into 1960s fashion. I hope you enjoyed taking a look back at these iconic styles. Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below, and let me know what your favorite 1960s look is. I'd love to hear from you.